So, let's talk about something you probably have in your kitchen cabinet right now. We're going to uncover how a few common spices once drove kings to conquer oceans, build entire empires, and literally redraw the map of the world. Yeah, it's a pretty wild idea, right? Long before we thought about gold or oil or even technology as things that shape our world, there was spice. That was the original global game changer. And we're talking about stuff you know well: pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. For hundreds of years, these tiny little things were one of the most powerful forces on the planet. I mean, they're the reason we have the interconnected world we do today. So this is that story. It's the story of how our simple, universal hunger for taste, well, it kickstarted the very first global economy. Okay, so let's rewind. We have to start at the very beginning, back when spice was basically the ancient world's version of gold. It was the first real global commodity. So how did it all get started? Well, thousands of years ago, it began with the spice routes. And this wasn't just one road, it was this massive network. Just picture it: caravans crossing these huge, sweeping deserts, hauling this incredibly precious cargo all the way from the pepper fields of India to the packed markets of Egypt and Rome. We always think of gold as the ultimate sign of wealth, right? But back then, in the ancient world, spice was right up there with it. Seriously, at times black pepper was literally worth its weight in gold. The Romans were obsessed. They used it for cooking, for medicine. They even used it as currency to pay soldiers. Its value was just insane because it was so rare, and nobody in Europe really knew where it came from. It was a total mystery. And that brings us to a really crucial point. Spice wasn't just about making food taste good. It was about power. If you controlled the spice trade, you controlled unbelievable wealth and political clout. And that was a prize nations were more than willing to go to war for. Okay, so that fight for control, that brings us right into our next chapter. Europe's absolutely desperate search for a new way to get those spices, a way to cut out the old gatekeepers. So, picture this. It's the 1400s and Europe is going crazy for spices. Demand is through the roof, but there's a huge problem. Arab and Venetian traders have a total monopoly on the routes. And every time the spices changed hands, the price just shot up. It was astronomical. So the kingdoms of Europe started asking themselves a question that would change the world. What if? What if we could just cut out the middleman? And that one question, it kicked off a global race. You have European demand hitting this fever pitch. Then, bam, 1498. The Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama does the unthinkable. He sails all the way around Africa and reaches India. He opens up a direct sea route for the very first time. And just like that, the floodgates were open. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, England, they all just dove headfirst into the race, sailing into completely unknown waters, all for the promise of spices. And the result of this whole race was, well, it was monumental. This hunt for spice is what launched the age of discovery. Think about that. And with it came the birth of global trade as we know it. But yeah, this new era of trade, it wasn't exactly peaceful. Which brings us to our third and maybe the most intense chapter of this story: the empires built on spice and the brutal, bloody fight for the islands where they grew. The ultimate prize, the real jackpot, was this tiny group of islands called the Moluccas, what we now know as part of Indonesia. And why were they so important? Because they were the only place in the entire world where you could find nutmeg and cloves. The only place. This made them the dead center of vicious colonial wars. You had these powerful new corporations like the Dutch East India Company, building forts, setting up these ruthless monopolies, basically guarding the spice trade like it was their own private treasure chest. But it's so important to remember, this story isn't just about kings and empires in Europe. I mean, behind every one of those ships, behind every contract, there were thousands of local people. The farmers, the traders, the sailors, whose homelands produced these spices, and whose lives and cultures were completely turned upside down by this global hunger. Okay, so let's bring all of this back to today. Let's talk about the lasting legacy of this whole thing, what we can kind of think of as our global spice rack. So what's the big takeaway here? What did this whole race for flavor leave behind? Well, for one, the spice trade connected continents on a global scale for the very first time. It literally laid the groundwork for modern trade. It fueled the rise of colonial empires. And here's something really cool. A lot of the shipping lanes that giant cargo ships use today, They were first mapped out by sailors centuries ago, all because they were looking for spice. So when you look at the whole picture, from the ancient markets in India to the busy ports of Venice, the story of spice is really a story about connection, sometimes voluntary and, yeah, often forced. But it was about connecting people across distances that once seemed impossible to cross. The whole thing is it's proof that something that seems so small, like a single grain of pepper, can absolutely change the entire course of human history. And that brings us right back to where we started, your kitchen. So seriously, the next time you reach for some cinnamon or grind some pepper onto your food, just pause for a second. Remember, you're not just adding flavor, you are, quite literally, tasting history. It's a pretty cool thought to end on, isn't it? Our world, in so many ways, is connected by these threads of flavor. Thanks so much for tuning in.